We'll start positively by talking about FC Hollywood themselves, Wrexham, who I'm definitely going to be talking about a lot for the foreseeable future. I can almost guarantee that. We all know they've got a lot of money, Kieran, but give us an idea of how big this juggernaut is in championship terms and how much bigger it could get over the next year or so.
Yeah, I think Wrexham is intriguing. If I put them on my little spreadsheet that I've got in front of me now, they would already be in the sort of the bottom of the second quartile of championship clubs. They're generating more money than the likes of Hull and Swansea. They're a wee bit behind Borough, but again, they're probably around about the same as QPR. And that's with League Two money, because we've only seen their League Two accounts, and there will have been an upkick in League One, and there'll be another uptick when they move to the Championship next season, because for every £1 they were generating from the League Two TV deal, you get 10 in the Championship, and that can only be of benefit. And I would imagine there will be some clauses in the contracts that Wrexham have with sponsors that will increase the amount of sponsorship money, because there's going to be a new series of Welcome to Wrexham, and there's going to be some big kids in town. So I would say they will be certainly top 10 as far as revenue is concerned. They don't have the benefit of parachute payments. They don't have the benefit of a big stadium. So that will counteract some of the issues. But yes, I think there'll be a competitive budget next season.
Yeah. Well, we've already heard some big words from the likes of Rob McElhenney, the co-owner, saying he doesn't know the meaning of the word consolidation and stuff like that. And they've been linked with several big names so far this summer. Basically, any Premier League player in their mid-30s who is out of contract has been linked with Wrexham over the past few weeks. And while they haven't made too much of a splash in the transfer market just yet, if they were to go out and essentially get a whole new team of recognisable names like your Tom Kearneys, your Danny Ingses and what have you, would they still be fine in terms of PSR rules in your book?
Yes. We don't know how much they lost last season, but they were losing $100,000 a week in League Two. But they're not alone in that. The likes of Salford were doing the same. Stockport lost even more. You're allowed to lose £39 million over 3 years in the Championship for a club that's been in the EFL for 3 years. So they're probably arriving with losses, perhaps somewhere in the region of 10 to 12 million. So therefore they can afford to lose more money. I think the big issue for them is that you are against some pretty senior citizens. You're up against clubs where the owners have been quite happy to put in $300,000 to $400,000 a week. Yeah. Steve Gibson at Borough, Bristol City, even the likes of Preston and Millwall. They've been losing £1 million a month. And whether Reynolds and McElhenney, A, have the capacity to do that, and B, have the willingness to do that. They've done very well out of Welcome to Wrexham. I'm not saying they're being bad owners, far from it. They've been absolutely brilliant. There's a buzz about the town that anybody that's been connected to Wrexham will know has not been seen for many, many a year. But all of a sudden, it becomes a completely different beast. You've got some clubs, and if we think about Fulham with Mitrovic a few seasons ago, at the time that was the biggest ever contract in the Championship, over $100,000 a week for a second tier club. Jamie Vardy was probably on more than that when Leicester were promoted a couple of seasons ago. So yes, they will be connected with some big clubs, but at the same time, they're going to find it not as easy. You can buy your way out of the National League. You can buy yourself out of League Two. You can buy yourself out of League One because you've got different cost control rules. Championship, completely different beast.
Yeah, that's basically what we've been saying for weeks. And we've got a fair bit of blowback from Wrexham fans along the way. But that is exactly the case, isn't it? And, you can talk for days about who they're going to sign and what big names are going to be coming through the door. But they've basically gone from being a big fish in a small pond to now being a big fish in a lake. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, if you look at the calibre of some of those clubs that have come down, remember, Leicester City won the Premier League 10 years ago. Leicester City were in the quarterfinals of the European Cup 9 years ago. We've got clubs where they are used to getting 30,000 people a week turning up, and the benefits that brings. Now, what has happened at Wrexham? Absolutely fantastic, but it is a different beast. You are coming up against international players as opposed to players who have done extremely well for Wrexham, and I'm not taking anything away. But if I was Wrexham, anything mid-table or above would be a good season.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a team coming up with Wrexham, who seem to have just as big a budget, perhaps even bigger than Wrexham, is Birmingham City. Now, you had the chairman, Tom Wagner, coming out not too long ago saying that they're going to be the highest revenue-generating club in Championship history without parachute payments, which is some big old words, Kieran. And just over a couple of years ago, Birmingham City were a club properly on their arses. Didn't know who actually owned them. Several different problems. So how on earth have they got into this position in, just over a couple of years?
Yes, I mean, Wagner's comments are certainly bullish. I'm looking at my figures here. If they say they're going to make more money than Leeds United did a few years ago, when Leeds were challenging at the top of the Championship and selling out Elland Road every week to the best part of 40,000 people, then fair play to them. They must have some fantastic deals. I think they are trying to leverage off the Tom Brady factor. Now, how much of a brand he brings to Birmingham City is an unknown, but there's certainly the direction of travel for Blues is very positive, and on a personal level, I'm absolutely delighted because all the Blues fans I know, they as you said, they've been on their arses for a fair old while, and lugubrious people from Birmingham is part of the local characteristics, but it is good to see them in a more positive light. The record revenues, well, if they do that, then fair play to them, but that means they're going to be generating the thick end of £60 million.
Which is good going for a championship club, isn't it? So if that is the case, then flipping out, they must have done some bloody good deals. But we've heard plenty of football owners over the years giving it the big one, haven't we? And yes. Then failing to deliver, particularly in the championship. But it seems like Birmingham's owners genuinely do mean business. So would you be excited if you were a Birmingham fan, Kieran?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the fact that they signed a player for £15 million in League One, where the cost control rules are pretty relaxed, mainly because for every pound you put into a club, if you're the owners, if you put money in the form of shares, you can spend an extra £1 on wages and transfer fees. So again, as I was saying earlier, you can effectively buy yourself out of that division historically. You can't do that in the Championship. So they will have a legacy year. I suspect they lost a lot of money in 2024. So they will have a legacy year of losses to deal with. And that brings its own particular set of challenges. So I think the issue for Birmingham is that they've got to navigate PSR. Yes, I'd expect it to be a record revenue for Birmingham City as far as being members of the Championship are concerned. But take a looking at the last decade, they've been averaging around about £20 million. Even if they get a 50 or even a 100% increase in that, the money's got to be spent well. It will be soaked up, a lot of that in wages, transfer fees, overheads, and Birmingham have been quite good at losing money. That when this season they were just before they were relegated, they were losing £500,000 a week.
Well, it seems like they're in a much more positive place now, aren't they? Which is the main thing, really, which I think everyone's happy about, considering where they were not too long ago. Well, we've had our nice positive start to the episode, Kieran. Now it's time to really bring down the tone by talking about Sheffield Wednesday. Now, we've spoken about them a lot in recent weeks on the podcast: missed wage payments, rejected takeover bids, etc. We don't need to go over all that again because we know where it's standing. Well, I say we know where we're standing with Sheffield Wednesday. We don't really, but we've got a good idea of roughly where they are. And when we do this annual chat with you, we always seem to have a Chancery section. I feel like this one might be slightly longer than usual. Kieran, how worried are you about Sheffield Wednesday?
Yeah, of all of the clubs in the Championship, they are the one which you have to watch the most in terms of the precarious position that they are in. Nobody knows where Chancery gets his money from, but given that the club is late with wages, has messed around, has really annoyed the EFL as well. It's looking at a 3-session transfer embargo, which is going to make next year really tough. And they actually had one of the lower wage budgets in the Championship in their first season when they returned. So they've got two issues. A, making sure that they can pay the bills. And B, how does this impact upon the summer? They effectively can only sign loan players and Bosmans, which is restrictive. But we've seen clubs in previous years just about navigate their way through such choppy waters. But yes, I am very concerned. Matt Slater of The Athletic, who is somebody who I hold in very high regard, I think he's put out an article saying that Mandarich has tried to get involved, has effectively been shown that it's not welcome. I'm aware that Chancery was originally looking for in excess of £300 million for Sheffield Wednesday, and when everybody stopped laughing because they thought, Deljon, you've got a zero at the end of that number, which I think you probably need to remove. He reduced it then to 150 million. I think the last asking price I heard was 75 million. Sheffield Wednesday is not worth 75 million pounds. The infrastructure in terms of what's happened at Hillsborough, there's not been enough investment there. So whoever acquires the club, assuming that somebody is going to acquire the club, has to spend money to make sure that it's in a sufficiently satisfactory position that you can play football there. Yes, they've got the potential of they've got a fantastic fan base, and that's one of the big positives. And yes, it's a big city, but the club has been mismanaged for many years by somebody who A, doesn't understand football, and B, is unwilling to take sensible advice. You put those two elements together, and you've got the crisis club that we have at present. You've got players who are out of contract in a week. If those players haven't been paid their May pay packet, well, if you think they're going to sign a new contract with Sheffield Wednesday, I think you're either very naive or your name's Chancery.
Yeah, well, nothing too surprising there, I don't think. But it seems to me from the reports that I'm seeing that essentially Chancery is asking for too much money. There is a lot of interest in Wednesday, but Chancery is asking, he's basically put a Premier League valuation on what is essentially a struggling Championship club. So what is the most likely outcome here in ending this saga? Is it just the waiting game for Chancery to finally lower those demands?
Well, I think there are three potential outcomes. Outcome number one, he finds some money from a source. Now, nobody's known where his historic sources would be, but it could be that wherever he was generating money to fund the club, that tap, which appears to have been turned off, is once again turned back on. Option number 2 is, as you say, Ryan, he does come to his senses and he agrees to drop the asking price. And under those circumstances, what I advise everybody to do is let him leave with a bit of dignity, because I think that he is an individual I'm not trying to be as polite as I can, for whom vanity is an issue. And what you don't want to do is to chase him out of town. So if it can be organised in such a way that he accepts a reasonable price, and in my opinion, a reasonable price would be sub £50 million, probably looking at somewhere in the region of 40 to 50 million. And you have to throw in Hillsborough with that, of course. And he then either writes off the loans which are due to him, or they are bought in some form of earn-out along the lines of, if Sheffield Wednesday are promoted in the next 5 years, then if he doesn't get any interest on his outstanding loans, but he'll get some sort of payment should the club be successful. So that's option number 2. Option number 3, and this is the least palatable, is that he throws his toys out the pram and puts the club into administration. And if that's the case, it's an immediate 12-point penalty. It's a potential further 15-point penalty. If you come out of administration and you haven't paid your unsecured creditors at least 25 pence in the pound, you've got people losing jobs, you've got footballers being used as commodities by the administrators, and you've got the cost of the administration itself. What people talk about Derby County going into administration, what they don't tend to mention is that the cost of the Derby County administration, by the time you added everything in, was not shy of £4 million. Well, that's £4 million that's leaving football. And that's local suppliers not getting paid, and that's people losing their jobs, as well as the negative impact, of course, that it has on what you're seeing on the pitch, because you can't afford to recruit players, and starting next season with the 12 points, effectively on minus 12 points.
Yeah. I have seen some rumours, Kieran, that Chansiri just simply can't afford to take a lower valuation than the one he's putting forward. And if that's the case, would that mean that Sheffield Wednesday are just stuck in limbo for the foreseeable future? And how likely a case do you think that is?
Well, we don't know enough details, and yes, I have heard those stories. Effectively, something along the lines of Dejan Chansiri has borrowed money from people, and that money is secured on his investment in Sheffield Wednesday. And if he was to sell the club for, let's say, 45 million pounds, that would give him insufficient resources to pay back his lenders, and his lenders would not be happy. Now, that could be an internet conspiracy theory, for all we know. So you have to be sceptical to a certain extent. I think in terms of keeping the club in limbo, is that if he has no cash, we've got a problem, because Sheffield Wednesday are losing £150,000, £200,000 a week. So if he's not got the money to subsidise the club at those levels, then either the players who are out of contract on the 30th of June, they walk elsewhere, which I think there's a fair chance that will happen, and you have to recruit players effectively on good League One wages to try to compete in the Championship. And Sheffield Wednesday already have the 3rd or 4th lowest wage bill in the Championship, and they probably outperformed their position last season.
Another club who seems to be in a lot of bother, Kieran, is Leicester City. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. They're facing a potential points deduction for breaching PSR rules the last time they're in the Championship. And it's quite a complicated case, Kieran. But in the most simplistic terms possible, do you think Leicester will get a points deduction or not, if I were to ask you to look in your big crystal ball?
Well, they're already up on a charge, or they're pretty certain to be on a charge from the Premier League for the losses that they made for the 3 years ended the 30th of June 2024. And what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 months is that, as you may be aware, Ryan, there's not much love lost between the EFL and the Premier League, especially when it comes to the distribution of money. But they have managed to get around the table, and historically, it used to be that if you were given a points deduction by the EFL, but you've just been promoted, the Premier League would not apply it, and vice versa. That relationship no longer exists. That caveat no longer exists. So Leicester are effectively up on a charge, or going to be up on a charge from the Premier League, which could result in a points deduction given by the Premier League, which then gets applied by the EFL. Leicester City then have to prepare their accounts for the 3 years to the 30th of June 2025. And the loophole which existed, which was taken advantage of by Leicester City Football Club, where, thanks to the genius of their lawyer, Nick DeMarco, they managed to prove that they were in neither the Premier League nor the EFL at the 30th of June 2023, and therefore avoided sanction from both of those organisations. Well, that loophole has been tightened up. So they won't be able to benefit from that. So they could be on a second set of charges when they send off their results to the EFL. And I think they have to be in by the 1st of March. So they could have already had a points deduction from the Premier League, and then the EFL say, we need to have a little bit of a chat because you were still losing money. It was very noticeable in the Premier League last season that Leicester were relying on loan signings. Yes, they sacked Steve Cooper. They probably would have sacked Van Nistelrooy during the season as well, but I don't think they could afford to. Such was the precarious nature of their finances. There are stories doing the rounds, and again, here we have to say, be very cautious, because the credibility of these stories has to be called into question, that the owners themselves are not in as strong a financial position as perhaps they were 10 years ago. And therefore, the ability of the owners to subsidise the club in the Championship will be impacted. And therefore, selling off the prize assets of the clubs in terms of players could be a big driver for Leicester City over the course of the summer.
It sounds like they have been in a bit of danger of breaching it this past season as well. Looking ahead to the next window, considering they'll still have a pretty big wage bill, could they be in danger of breaching PSR again this coming season?
For 25-26, who knows? I'm more concerned about 24-25, where, my understanding is that they are going to be in a very, very weak position going into the end of last season. I'm amazed that they've not been selling players before the 30th of June. That could be due to two reasons. It could be due to the fact that the players might not want to leave, or it could be that they've not got players that people are interested in as far as the Premier League is concerned, because again, looking at my spreadsheet here, the last time Leicester City were in the Premier League, they were relegated with a squad where the average wage was 92 grand a week. Well, who's going to pick up players on those type of salaries?
Yeah, it's a fair bit of money, that, isn't it? But here's my question now, which I'm hoping you'll be able to provide some clarity on, but maybe even you won't know. If Leicester do get charged for breaching PSR last season, and they don't go back to the Premier League for the foreseeable future, because in my expert opinion, I think their squad's a lot weaker this time around than it was last time around. So if we don't see them back in the Premier League, will they get charged, or will they just not actually be affected? Because, as you mentioned, the Premier League and the EFL are completely different entities.
Yes, but that issue has been resolved to a certain extent by a change in the constitution of both the Premier League and the EFL. So if the Premier League charge Leicester City for the losses that they made for the 3 years ended the 30th of June 2024, and they say, well, we think you should have a points deduction, the EFL can now say, we'll apply it on your behalf. And how big is that points deduction? Well, I think it's fair to say that Leicester City have pissed off a lot of football regulatory authorities, which is fine, provided you're winning your cases. When it comes to losing your cases, certainly under the EFL rules, and I think under the Premier League rules, you start off with a tariff of a 6-point deduction. And then, based on just how much over the limit of the PSR total you are, it could be, I think in the EFL, it's an extra 1 point for every 1.5 million. I think in the Premier League, it might be an extra 1 point deduction for every 5 million over the limit. And then we have something called aggravating and mitigating factors. Now, if we take a look at the points deduction that was given to Birmingham City a couple of years ago, Birmingham City self-reported themselves to the EFL. They've said, we signed a player, we realised, having done the sums...
Hands up. Sorry, guys. We fucked up.
And to be fair to the EFL, they said, we'll knock 2 points off your charge.
Okay.
So
it's kind of like pleading guilty for a crime.
That's right. If you've committed a crime and you go to a police station and you say, look, I've done something wrong, I'm going to plead guilty, that will be taken into consideration when you're standing in front of the beak. Whereas Leicester City's approach, which has been, I think fair to say, quite contrarian, no, we weren't part of the Premier League, we weren't part of the EFL. Now, they have managed to prove that was the case, but if you've upset somebody, it's a bit like if you've done a deliberate handball and you've got away with it, and you've got a centre half who's a bit angsty, you know that the next time that centre half comes in contact with you, he's going to give you a good kicking. So, there could be aggravating factors, which is where there has not been cooperation with the regulatory authorities. Now, could a commission take the view that Leicester's approach has been one of effectively non-cooperation? We have to wait and see. And again, we have to be stressed. We've not seen the evidence which have been put forward. And also, Leicester City have not been charged by the EFL. And we don't know what's happening in terms of their relationship with the Premier League.
So I may be completely misreading this the wrong way, but could there be a possibility that Leicester have points deductions for the next 3 seasons? So one for the Championship the last time they were in it, then one for pissing off the Premier League the season afterwards, and then maybe one if they're also breaching PSR this coming season. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in fact, they could have 2 points deductions in 25-26. One from the Premier League for the year that they were promoted, and one from the EFL when they submit their 24-25 accounts. So those two could be added together. To a certain extent, Leicester City, who have been quite smart in the way that they've dealt with things, if I was them, I would have tried to have arranged a plea bargain with the Premier League last season and say, yeah, we did spend too much money. Yes, we are going to plead guilty. Yes, please give us a points deduction. Because let's face it, they were relegated in February. They were relegated in November. But in theory, they could have turned things around. Just looking at that side, it was never a side that was going to survive as far as the Premier League was concerned. And if they'd taken an 8, 10, 12 points deduction in the Premier League season, I think they'd probably still finished above Southampton. But they would have finished 19th instead of 18th. I ask you this, Ryan, who cares?
Who does care?
Who does care? Ipswich would have got an extra £3.5 million in prize money. Leicester would have lost £3.5 million. But what they potentially face this season is not 1 but 2 points deductions.
Wow. I knew they were facing a points deduction, and we probably should move on very shortly, but this sounds like a lot more of a severe punishment than I was expecting with Leicester, because it sounds like they may get the book properly thrown at them.
Yes, and we don't know what's happened in the 24-25 accounts. Yeah, we have to be absolutely straight about that. And they were noticeable by their lack of spending last season, and they did use the loan market and so on. And also, some players, Jamie Vardy is effectively retired. Some of the loan players have gone back to their host clubs. There will be a significant reduction in the wage bill as a result of that. Whether that's enough, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Well, staying within PSR seems to be a constant battle now for any side relegated from the Premier League. So just very quickly looking at Ipswich and Southampton, they're fine in that regard, aren't they? I haven't heard any murmurs saying anything against that. Yes.
Ipswich have sold Delap at a profit, so they've got that to factor in as well. Yeah, Ipswich have got absolutely no problems. They're probably in a position where they can spend. I would expect them, without being too harsh. And I have to say, I know nothing about football. When I looked at their signings last season, I thought those are the signings of a club who want a promotion charge in 25-26.
Yeah.
And we've seen this before. I'm not saying, they spent a lot of money, but actually by Premier League standards, spending £100 million isn't even keeping up. The average spend in the Premier League is 140 mil. So, yes, it was big by their standards, but it wasn't big by Premier League standards. But they do have players who look good in the Championship. So I think Ipswich Town fans have something to be quite excited about this season.
Yeah.
Southampton, I don't see a problem at Southampton either. They're effectively budgeted to get relegated.
Yeah, which is probably wise considering how they did.
Yes.
But now feels as an appropriate a time as any to talk about the gap between the Premier League and the Championship, Kieran, because it's back-to-back seasons now that all three newly promoted teams have been relegated from the Premier League. The gap is undoubtedly the biggest it's ever been and is seemingly only getting bigger. And because we've had, I think this would be the fourth season coming up, where all 17 teams have had at least 4 seasons in the Prem now, the budgets are just incomparable to any team who's coming up to the Championship, and that includes Leeds, who themselves have quite a big budget by newly promoted standards, don't they?
They do, yes. I mean, Leeds have a fairly expensive squad, well, very expensive by Championship standards. It's a case of being smart. And the problem with football fans is football fans don't want their club to be smart. They want their football club to be big, and trying to get that psyche across, trying to say this is going to be our strategy, is very difficult. But I think you're absolutely right, Ryan. What we've got is a 17 and a 6 and a 7, and that 6 and 7 are interchangeable, and there is a danger. I do think that, without wanting to get too bogged down in Premier League football, there is at least one club where I think I look at their squad and I think, well, they've lost their best players and they're not showing signs of replacing their best players. They could become embroiled in a relegation fight. I won't name the club because, frankly, I just don't need the battering on social media.
I'll do it for you. Is it Wolves?
Couldn't possibly say. But when I talk to Wolves fans, that's the concern that they're expressing, that they've lost their 2 best players. And yes, they had a good run towards the end of last season. And yes, they've still got some good players, but they probably look in a slightly weaker position. Brentford, if they lose a couple of their best players, Bournemouth have lost a couple of their best players as well. So there could be a couple of clubs in the mix. I don't expect Brentford to fall into that because Brentford are just simply too savvy, in my view. But Bournemouth have spent a lot of money, but they have lost some of their big names. And you could say, well, hold on. Brighton did the same when they lost Caicedo and McAllister and Cucurella and Ben White and so on, and they've managed to survive. So it's not easy, but I think Wolves haven't looked to replace yet, and that's where my concern lies. But yeah, the bookies aren't mugs, and you look at the odds for Sunderland and Burnley in particular to be relegated, and those odds are very, very short.
Yeah, very short. I did say at the start of this episode that we were going to be talking for a long time about 4 clubs in particular. So I want to try and touch as many bases as possible, Kieran, in the quickest time possible. So with that being said, we'll talk about some other championship sides who have had problems in the past. And Blackburn Rovers, they're an interesting one, aren't they? Because their owners have had various legal issues over in India over the past couple of years, making it difficult for them to put money into the club. They haven't invested much in recent years. It seems like fans have had enough of them, but they don't seem to be showing much interest in selling.
Well, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, they are a myth in an enigma, in a conundrum, because they've not been to Blackburn for at least a decade. I think it was following a fan throwing a snowball at one of the Venkies, and they said, "Well, we're none of this nonsense. We don't have this problem in Delhi." I think there's probably a reason for that. I'm not a meteorologist, but even my scant knowledge of weather patterns might be able to answer that one for them. And therefore, you've got to ask yourself the question, what were the motivations for buying Blackburn Rovers in the first place? I mean, there is the legendary fact that they didn't know that relegation existed, so therefore they thought that they were acquiring a Premier League in a forever Premier League. But when I talk to people who have connections with Blackburn Rovers, they've said sort of historically, you want £1 million a month, here's £1 million a month. They've been quite good. That's become more difficult over the course of the last 2 years because of domestic challenges that they have. Though my understanding is that they are now committed to paying around about £4.5 million over the summer months. That's simply to keep the lights on, though. That's to pay the wage bill over the course of the summer months. And they're trying to get an arrangement now with the Indian tax authorities and with the Indian court authorities, which means that they don't have to get a court approval before they can send money to the UK, as has been the case over the course of the last 2 seasons. So they have been cutting things to the bone. They've lost the women's team as a result of that, and I think that's a shame for A, the people involved, and B, for the opportunities for the women's game to grow in Lancashire. So yeah, it's messy as far as Blackburn is concerned. Why has nobody bought the club? I think we could also be entering sort of chancery territory in the sense of what the owners think Blackburn's worth and what the market thinks Blackburn are worth are far apart. The Venkies have lost £200 million since they acquired Blackburn Rovers, and they probably want to get a bigger chunk of that back than realistically a sensible prospective buyer would be willing to pay.
Interesting. Well, it's easy to forget how much bother West Bromwich Albion were in this time last year. They were put under an EFL-imposed business plan last summer, which is very easy to forget, but they've obviously got fairly new owners now. I've been spending a bit more recently. So are West Brom a club on the up, do you think? Or should we be encouraged with them looking forwards?
I think the new owners are a breath of fresh air. I think the problem that you've got is that West Bromwich Albion have some of the biggest losses under those new owners. They lost $700,000 a week in 23-24. But there's a positive buzz amongst Baggies fans, which I think is a relief for them. And some of the financial worries along the lines of, are we going to be able to pay the wage bill this month? I don't think those issues arise. I think the issue for West Brom is more a PSR issue than anything else.
Okay. So that sounds all right in my head. Everything you said there sounded like they should be all right, and they have got rid of a few big earners over this past summer, so that should be seen as a positive, I guess, from a West Brom perspective. I'm now going to be rude because I have to ask you about my beloved Derby County. We were, of course, properly on our arses not long ago, but now seem to be on the up with an owner who isn't willing to gamble on the club's very existence. So, in your very high opinion, do you like David Clowes and the much more tempered way he's running Derby County?
I've got huge admiration for David Clowes. He is a reluctant owner. He is an owner of Derby County because he genuinely loves the club, which you couldn't necessarily say about his predecessor, who appeared to come from nowhere, claiming to be a Derby County fan, and then left and hasn't been seen much of ever since. And Mel Morris is a very, very smart, very, very gifted business entrepreneur. I know what Mel Morris is up to in terms of AI at present, and the people I talk to say he's got his head screwed on. And I think he said recently the biggest mistake he made at Derby County was that he was a part-time owner in what was required at the time was a full-time job. David Clowes, I've got huge admiration for him. He's looking for third-party investment. There's no doubt about that. I think if he could pass on the club as a custodian, either from a minority investment from somebody else, or even would he be willing to relinquish control? I think he would. Whether there will be ramifications from that in terms of the contract that he had to buy Pride Park, ironically, from Mel Morris, we don't know the details there. I'm aware of some things which he has done on, as we say, a private basis, which my hat is tipped in his direction. So I can't give more than that. Other people at Derby County, I'm perhaps don't hold in such high regard, but David Clowes himself, yes.
Yeah. Build the statue. We'll finish off, Kieran, with a couple of questions which I ask you every single year, and it's always fascinating to see how your answers change in a matter of 12 months. So the first question, who's the best run club in the Championship in your opinion?
I'm going for one which I probably wouldn't have said a few years ago, and this one has given me a lot of consideration. I'm going to go for Queen's Park Rangers.
Oh.
And the reason why I say that is that on a player recruitment budget of the square root of fuck all, that's an accounting piece of terminology. They've managed to survive. They've managed to get control of their wages. They did have legacy issues. Their wage bill is bottom six. The total squad cost, that's the total cost of the squad, £2 million. And yet, QPR, they did okay last season. So, I gave that one a lot of thought. And Derby County, I like a lot because of David Clowes. Watford, strange club. They make profits through selling players, but at the same time, there's other issues with Watford which are less positive, which I'm not prepared to say on air, given that the buggers tried to sue me a couple of months ago. I've gone for QPR. I like what I see at Coventry as well, I'll be honest. Again, under a new owner, that they seem to have done very well in terms of season ticket sales and so on. I've given the crown to QPR.
Wow. I wonder what odds they would have been at the start of the show for them to be there. Now, they were one of the last clubs I would have expected you to say. And finally, Kieran, who's the club who's in your naughty books? Who do you have a bit of concern for going forwards? Name a club which doesn't have the suffix Wednesday.
There are two clubs where I'm a little bit concerned about. I mean, Cardiff City would have been there, but they were relegated. Hull City and Watford, which I've already mentioned. Watford
probably avoid Watford for the lawyers.
no, but I'm I Watford don't like me, and that's fine. I have no issue with that. The fact that they've sacked not only the manager but sort of management staff, office senior management team staff, and they're selling this as the owner wants to have more of a hands-on role. That's an unusual approach to take.